Hi, hello, and welcome to According to Weeze, the podcast, where we're going to have candid conversation with the hopes of finding a way forward in community. See, we exist and experience life at the intersection of our complex identities and our socio-cultural and political systems. And let's be real, the only way to dismantle it all is to start by dissecting it. So get cozy, get comfy, and let's dive in. Hello, 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 and welcome back to... I don't even know how many I've done. Another episode of According to Weeze, the podcast. Today, I am super, super excited to have artist extraordinaire. Can I call you that? That's what I think of you as. Artist extraordinaire, Tonika Johnson, Tonika Louiza Johnson, on the show. I'm going to let the people hear from you about you in a second. But I'm really excited to have this conversation and just to have you on, because it was literally born out of us here in Oakland having this conversation about, gentrification and all these other things. And we're like, we need to be talking about this. And then also simultaneously at Team Weeze, we always talk about the New York Times and how trifling they are. And I post about it all the time on IG. And people be like, but it's the New York Times. And I'm like, I don't fucking care if it's the federal government, actually, especially if it's them. But I don't care, right? Institutions of whiteness are institutions of whiteness. We have to be critical. So from this conversation, people don't know this, but Lucy on Team Weeze, they know who Lucy is actually from Chicago. And so is Andy, my sound editor. Shout out to Andy and Lucy. And they were like, yo, per our last conversation, right? It was like, we don't know why we didn't think about this before. Like, have you heard of the Maps Project? Super hype. And I was like, if y'all are hype, I got to get hype. Put me on. So then obviously I did. The listeners know I fall down research holes. And then I'll be Googling and consuming. And I was like, oh my God, and an actual dope artist. Oh, and the New York Times is trifling. Oh my God, all the things that I love. So I was like, photography, art, gentrification, projects for the community. Trifling as New York Times. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And then I obviously really looked into you as a person. And I was like, okay, value aligned, what she stands for is just all the things that people have to know about her and what she's doing. And if I can share my little corner of the internet to amplify you in this message, I got to do it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for thinking of me. Thank you.
Of course. So now I want you just to tell the people about yourself. Typically I like to do, because people can't see you, I like to do social identifiers just so that people understand, how you sit in the world. And you can do whichever ones you want, just like gender and race, English as a second first language, whatever you choose to share is up to you. Or you could be like, nope, I'm not sharing anything. That's fine too. And then just, right now, per this conversation, what do you want the people to know about you outside of your very nice bio that they'll get in our show notes?
Right. I would like them to know my pronouns. I identify as she, her. And, I am a person who recently decided to allow myself to call myself an artist, a social justice artist. And my life up until 3 years ago led me to ultimately create a project called Folded Map that really encapsulates my life. It's like my biography packaged in a multimedia art project. And that project explores the present day impact of Chicago's historic segregation by using its grid map, our very unique grid map, and comparing addresses that are 15 miles apart together, but while also bringing the people who live at these addresses together to have a conversation. Thus, that is how the map folds. And so how I would describe myself is through people understanding that project. What enabled me to create a project that explores so many facets in which segregation impacts our lives is literally because I grew up as a little Black girl that loved arts in Englewood. in Chicago's notorious Englewood neighborhood. And the reason it's important for me to define myself is because of the insidious parts of segregation and racism that minimizes the intellectual ability and genius of Black and brown youth. And I really love being able to say and tell people the origin story of how I created Folded Map, that I literally thought about these things as a 13, 14-year-old because I had to be on public transportation. I had to go outside of my neighborhood to school. Everything that my life required for me to access resources also was me disrupting segregation. And I want the world to know that, yes, a little Black girl made those observations that eventually led to the creation of Folded Map. And it was those curiosities that I had as a 13, 14, 15-year-old that informed the passions that I decided to develop, the decisions that I decided to make as a result of identifying those passions. So, long story short, that is how I would define myself.
I'm like, cool, that's the whole episode. That's great. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for being here.
Black girl with camera from Southside Englewood, Chicago that created Folded Map. So that's how I'm going to just kick us off.
There we go. Okay, so I want to run it back. We're just going to start with Folded Maps.
Yeah.
Because there's so much here that I really need people to understand. And I say this selfishly because I am not from Chicago, obviously. The people know that. But used to live in St. Louis. So Chicago was like, I was like, where is my next closest real city? No shade to St. Louis. Please don't come for me. I love y'all too. But let's be real.
Population and metropolitan.
Right. You know, y'all are a city, but y'all are not metropolitan. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for helping me before all of my fam in St. Louis is like, we heard the podcast.
I know.
All of Southside comes for me. So I used to drive to Chicago, like, oh, here's my 5 hours, right? Or take the train and just like go to Chicago. You know, I shared with you that my first taste was in Chicago. It ruined me for life. And the thing that struck me most when I got there, obviously coming from growing up in the Bay Area, right? Like fully being very blessed to have parents that were like, this is racism, this is colonization, this is segregation, this is gentrification, this is history, these are the Black Panthers, like, you know, and also that's just very much the history in Oakland, like we have that spirit. Super blessed to have been raised up in that. So already kind of having that lens, having lived, you know, in New York and a couple other places, and I get to Chicago, this big metropolitan city, and I'm like, hi, I don't mean to be the Californian, but like, excuse me, are we not going to talk about how segregated it is, even though y'all all pretend that you're like super liberal and all love each other? And like, that's cool that you all love each other, but like, we're not going to talk about the deep segregation. Like, you can literally see it. And I'm not from Chicago, right? Like, I don't have roots in Chicago. This is just, I'm a sociologist by training who happens to know how whiteness functions and works and was like, oh, wait a minute.
I know.
And it's a very unique kind of segregation and gentrification to Chicago. And so I would love for you to speak about that so people can really contextualize and understand. Because I think when people hear Chicago, they're like, which Chicago's an amazing city, but they only really see or think of that, right? And then they're like, food, Chance the Rapper, fun, like baseball, also.
Yes. So Chicago is a diverse city, right? Just demographically. We literally have about equal percentage of white, Latino, Black, smaller population of Asian, but we have a significant percentage represented in those categories, right? And we're a metropolitan city, supposed to be a world-class city. However, the segregation is so real.
Mm-hmm.
The segregation is so real. We are a legacy segregated city, meaning that the segregation that people witnessed here is literally the same kind of segregation from 50, 60 years ago. So you can come to Chicago and pretty much get a very real, authentic experience of what separate, unequal, colors only, whites. You pick it up very quickly. You're like, this is an all Black area. This is an all Latino area. Like, and so it plays out in our geography. And this is where it gets really tied to the built environment. Because we've been segregated for so long, now you have actual neighborhoods and locations that have stigmas tied to it that come from the 50s, 60s, 40s, 30s. And as a result, you have the economic disparity. So because Chicago is on this dope little grid, you know, I was never good at fractions geometry or any of that. However, for whatever reason, because I guess I was public transportation using teenager, I was able to understand like coordinates on this grid map. So, you know, Chicago stretches north and south like 20 something miles. So you literally have streets that go through Chicago's segregation for like 17, 18 miles that start in the predominantly Black area and that go all the way to the predominantly white area. And so the funny thing is you have streets and addresses that are similar on in these very racially and economically different neighborhoods. Because our downtown, our middle point, is the 0. So going south in the predominantly Black part of Chicago, the addresses go from 1 to 100 and something. And same on the north. So you literally have that Chicago reference of Tale of Two Cities. It's easy for us to say that because you literally have two different kinds of lived experiences that are often on the same street, but just miles apart. So that is the reality of Chicago. And the other side of it is because that is our reality, and generations have existed and grown up in this deep segregation and inequity, we also have so many ways in which we disrupt and integrate. You know, we do have segregation, but all the ways in which we find how to integrate with each other is usually through arts and music. So that is why Chicago has like this summertime shy culture, because that's literally, you know, if you're interested in the arts or music, you're going to find community in that. So that is kind of like what Chicago is struggling with, and what we try to downplay, like how we become this city that enjoys Black barbecues, how we have neighborhoods that elevate certain music and cultures is beautiful, but how it occurs is because how segregated we are.
Yeah.
So that's the ugliness that we don't like to admit that contributes to some of our cultural things we celebrate. It really is born out of the deep segregation or our efforts to disrupt it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as an aside, if y'all have never spent a summer or like a summertime in Chicago, it's probably one of the littest cities I've been to in the summer.
Every day, all the time.
They're like literally, and this is coming from like, I lived in New York. And there was still something about Chicago where I was like, no, literally there's always something to do, and it's always so dope. And then the food, and then anyways, so everyone should go. So that's not just from a Chicagoan, because y'all love you some Chicago.
Oh, yes. I know somebody told me, especially because I got this tattoo of Englewood tomorrow. They was like, you like Jeezy. You just represent. I was like, oh, yeah, all of us here kind of like.
There's a couple cities, and I can't talk because Oakland is like that too. But it's like Oakland, Atlanta, Chicago. Yes. It's a couple cities in the U.S. where it's like, New Orleans, like Houston, Dallas, like you
You just be
can't.
so proud.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, this is why I said, St. Louis, please don't come for me. Because y'all are one of them too. But anyways, I digress.
No, but I just, to give you an idea of how stark the segregation is here, I have a lot of friends in Chicago that have moved to the West Coast that adore Oakland, that adore parts of California, but really always Oakland.
Yeah.
And so they come back and they try to explain to me, because I am a rare one in that I have never lived outside of Chicago, which is probably why I was able to create Photomap, because I even know it. But anyway, so they try to explain to me how diverse Oakland is. And even me, someone who has created a project that academics and policymakers and people who value this work respect, I couldn't comprehend it. I was like, okay, so wait, what do you mean it's diverse? Do you mean like they work together as diverse, or they go to schools together? It's like, no, people live around each other. I was like, okay, so you mean like, I was literally asking questions because I cannot even imagine.
Right.
Like, even though I went to a high school that was diverse at that time, we would have given anything to be able to like live around each other, but that's just wasn't a thing. So friends that come from experiencing and living in Oakland, they're just like, oh my gosh, you of all people would love Oakland. They're like, it's so diverse. And I literally could not envision it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't even know what that looked like.
It's funny because I always say, because we have our own problem with gentrification because of the tech industry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, any black and brown city does, right? But, and also, that's my most used phrase for 2021 currently, because I'm like, hold on, but, and, like, and also, like,
right.
That's mine. It does always, like, I have to have that moment of like, I'd be like, oh, like, things are changing. And I'm like, no shade, but I'm like, but we're still 5 steps ahead of Chicago, at least, like a little further. And granted, like you said, y'all are a legacy city. There is a lot of history to that in the Midwest. And, we have to talk about like transportation ports and why that is, and like the workforce. And there's so much history to it. And we have a different history here. But I will say that, like, growing up, not that we didn't have, obviously whiteness exists everywhere, white supremacy, patriarchy.
Yeah.
But we did really, like, we live with each other. Like, we were a community. Like, you lived, people from all over the world. And so now, even as an adult, when we have issues, quote unquote issues, we say, like, don't come to Oakland if you don't really like Oakland. Meaning, like, don't move here if you're from, we have a lot of people from like Boston that'll come and move here, and they want it to be, because Boston is another city similar to Chicago where it's like heavy, deep legacy segregation.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh, you thought you were going to come here
and get that.
And then you're mad, and now you're trying to police everyone around you. And then now you're also extra mad because maybe you're white or you're Asian or you're brown or whatever, but you want your quote unquote people, or the people that, might share the same social identity as you, to back you in this. And they're looking at you like, nah, fam, like, that's not how we get down here. No, and now you're extra mad, but then you're still taking it out on quote unquote authentic Oakland. Like, why are you here?
Yeah, that has to be so irritating to have an outsider come with that. And, I haven't even visited Oakland yet and can't wait, because just even from not experiencing Oakland and just only hearing about it, meeting people who come here from there, the way in which you all have embodied solidarity is just amazing to me. And it's something that is inspirational, and I speak of in the work that I do here in Chicago, which segregation can breed, silos, even amongst people of color. And, I love that Oakland spirit of solidarity amongst especially people of color who share in that same, who are impacted in the same way from the struggle.
100%.
And so, I feel like that's language people from Oakland would understand more so than Chicagoans initially. You know, we have to just be, because segregation is so evil here, and it just seeps into every part of your life. You just actually want to stay away from other groups just to be protected. And I get it, but for us to make the kind of necessary improvements, it requires that kind of Oakland solidarity amongst each other, you know. And I just applaud you all for being an example of that, because it's not a lot in this country. It really isn't.
Yeah. Well, as ambassador of Oakland in this particular moment, I thank you. Because it really is true. I mean, you know, I think about growing up, it was like, oh, Chinese New Year is lit. Let's go. Like, and you like where else does everyone know that it's Chinese New Year? Or if you see a particular, you know, color or flower draped around certain, you know, telephone poles in a certain neighborhood, you're like, oh, that's right. Know what it is, you know, XYZ or Dias de los Muertes or whatever. And you're like, yeah, like, let's get it. We turning up tonight over here or with these people or with that or, you know, whatever the case may be.
I love it.
I want you to expand. So let's pivot backwards just a little.
Yes.
Because I want folks to really understand the insidiousness of the segregation so that they can make that connection as to why Folded Maps Project was so important. Like connecting the dots for people, because from a sociological perspective, right? Not all sociologists who are interested in the liberation of marginalized people, use empirical evidence and have proven that, I think it's, and don't quote me on this percentage, I want to say it's like 95 or higher, but like within 95% or higher accuracy, you can predict a person's life outcomes. Literally, health, you know, level of education they will achieve, financial achievement, all of that based solely on their zip code. And then if you have more information, it's like, it's, you know, zip code and race, and then zip code, race, and then street is like within 100% accuracy.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you take that fact that there's empirical evidence that proves these corollaries, and then you go into a city like Chicago, deeply segregated on a grid map. Well, I mean, I don't know how politics works in Chicago, but I know how it works pretty generally. And what I know is that different parts of cities get different resources, right? This is why we can predict life outcomes.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that there is an impact there. So I would love for you to talk about that a little bit so that people, so that way we can really talk about like why the Folded Maps Project, because I don't want people to walk away from this not really grasping how deep this is.
Yeah, no, thank you for, you know, that little alley-oop. A Folded Map as a project did a couple of things. I would say the larger Chicago public was surprised by, but intuitively knew. One, we know that it's segregated. Two, we know that you can see it in as simple as a train ride on our public transportation system. However, the thing that we have avoided talking about is how it influences us personally in our social networks. And so once you get at how segregation influences your social networks and your relationships you have with people, then you can begin to see other things a little bit more visibly without knowing someone who has experienced the negative impacts of segregation, like how it influences the access to jobs you have, how it influences the schools that are the quality schools you have access to. And so Folded Map took all of the evidence that we knew, the evidence that you're talking about, the empirical evidence of segregation, not only just racially, economically, but the aldermatic fragmentation here, the political segregation here. And it literally kind of put it on its head and said, but what if the residents actually decided to talk to each other? If the very thing that divides us is race and geography, what would it be like if you actually talked to your distant neighbor about the very things that are wrong with this city? Forget the news that you hear, forget the evidence that you've read. What if you literally talked to someone who lives on the same street as you, your map twin, but 18 miles south or north, and you all actually just sat down and had a conversation? And so that's what Folded Map did for people. It visualized the disparity in a way that we knew, but you have to travel through to really understand. So it captured it in photos, and then it also provided a weird kind of social justice reality TV model of what these conversations would look like between people who live in these different neighborhoods that are resourced differently, that are racially segregated and economically different. Like, how would a conversation look between those people who live in the same city but have totally different experiences because of their location, because of the difference in resources? And so that's what Folded Map was able to do for Chicagoans, be like, oh, we don't all just have to vote our way out of it, or we don't have to just read a book or read a report and think we know, like, oh, we can actually disrupt this in our personal lives. Oh, I can actually be a South Sider and go all the way north and see the shit I'm entitled to. I can actually be a North Sider and not need permission to go to certain places on the South Side to see what it is these reports talk about. Like, yes, these reports are us, y'all. It's not like they're talking about other people. They're talking about decisions we make and the options that are given to us to make these decisions. So that's kind of what the epiphany Folded Map allowed Chicagoans to use as a mirror to kind of see ourselves in a way that outsiders could easily come in and see from places like Oakland. Be like, no, y'all dope, but y'all segregated. Like, y'all don't see this? Like, what is going on? If you see it, why not fix it?
Yeah.
But when you're so in it, you just normalize it.
Of course.
And so that's what I use, especially Folded Map, to get the white population to see just how you talk about Black people in neighborhoods that are disinvested, how you might blame stuff on them. That's the same with segregation in Chicago. You've normalized it. Your liberal self has normalized it so much that you don't even think it's a problem. You have ignored it. You think it's natural, and it isn't. So yeah, that's a way I could describe, because your question was so good. I've never been asked that question. That's how I could define or describe kind of what Folded Map enabled Chicagoans to do. Kind of just like hold a mirror up to ourselves and be like, how are we so liberal, but yet we still are this way? How are we so liberal, but yet it's still so segregated? Let's really talk about it. And if you don't think this segregation represents how we want to interact, then what can we do personally? Because clearly laws, litigation, policy, it won't get us there because it hasn't. So now we got to add a different little ingredient. And that ingredient might be, yeah, we have to look at our personal lives. We have to, because they ultimately determine what will eventually be in reports.
Yep.
Why did you choose that neighborhood? Why you didn't choose that other one? Why you don't go over there? Why do you call this neighborhood that? Do you think that that's actually that's going to economically impact that neighborhood by everyone having this opinion about it? Like, come on, like we have to, it's word of mouth at this point, you know? Mm-hmm. That's also how we're perpetuating it. So that's what Folded Map was able to do.
Yeah. And I love that because there's so much. So obviously I already named this, but like I look at the world from the lens of sociology and behavioral science, because that's my like,
Yes, I
kind of
love it.
training and where I nerd out.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so much evidence that proves that we actually, like, the most shifts that happen in people to create enough space for change
Mm-hmm.
is in those direct interactions.
Yes.
So you called them like twin addresses or twin map?
Map twins, yeah.
Map twin. There we go. I was like, oh, that's it, because you're a map twin. So it's like, if I can point to you on a map, like if this is 0 and you're here, exact same distance from 0 on the other direction, like that's your twin. That is your mirrored self.
Yes, that's,
In a completely
y'all
different,
related.
Right.
Y'all
city
neighbors.
kin.
Yes.
Right. But has a completely different lived experience, potential access, outcomes, so on and so forth, simply because of segregation. And so because of socioeconomic and racialized segregation, they have been relegated to a particular portion of the city that is then, we know how segregation works, underfunded, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Then you can begin to care.
But you've adopted that belief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's always been that way. But we know that if those people, for example, if people didn't hold those beliefs, maybe they wouldn't vote certain ways, or maybe they would show up for their neighbors, and maybe they would, start to your point, go to that restaurant on the other side. But it takes that first catalyst, that introduction point, the seeing of like, oh, here's a family just like my family that lives 6.5 minutes from me.
Yeah.
Well, no, Chicago's traffic, y'all wildin'.
So and we're expansive. So yes, it's literally.
I was gonna say, right. So it's gonna take longer than 6.5 minutes. It's gonna take longer.
But sadly, there are parts where you notice that disparity and difference in literally 10 minutes. Right. So you're not too far off, though.
Right. So I just love that because as like a social scientist, I'm like, there's so much proof that literally says in that moment of exposure, that can be the catalyst that changes people, which is actually why this next generation of kids that's coming up.
Oh, I can't wait.
Because they have so much access to information, connecting, through the internet and all these other things. And that's so normalized. Like, they're so different than we were even, or are, or their parents are. And I'm like, like that's the thing. So I think every city needs to do this. Obviously, without stealing her shit, which is a perfect segue.
Yes. Well, they can do it by using the Photo Map Action Kit. That is a way for them to do a self-guided discovery of their map twin neighborhood. So
there we go. So y'all know normally we're like at the end, it's like, how do you support? We're going to drop that now. This is how you can go do this yourself, and you should. But you know who else did it? So, okay.
Yes.
So Petty LaBelle is my like alter ego on the internet.
That's hilarious. I love that
It's
name.
not my fault. She be wildin'. She just says stuff sometimes.
That is so funny.
So Petty LaBelle got a question.
Yes.
So the listeners, my followers, know that I have a long-standing vendetta with the New York Times for a variety of reasons. I have literally gotten into it with their writers on Instagram.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh no, like it's real. Like then they be in my DMs and I'm like, nope. Or like, you want anonymity? That's not how journalism works. Like, I am not a journalist. I don't have to protect your identity. You wilding in my DMs. Screenshot.
Exactly.
Anyways.
Exactly.
So I have to name that for people who don't know. If they're like, wow, Weeze really is coming for the New York Times. This is a long-standing history. And in the pettiness inside of me, I'm not happy this happened to you. I'm not happy this happens to any melanated person, specifically Black folks, specifically Black women and femmes. Because it is a functionality of whiteness, but
it is.
I was like, oh, look, the New York Times is out here New York Timesing it up.
Yes.
So you had a situation occur. Would you like to tell the people what happened? Because I still think deeper reparations are required, but that is my personal opinion.
Oh, yes. No, it is. It's not over.
Oh, good.
It's not over. As I told people, folded map is trademarked. And a lot of people, especially a lot of photographers, didn't even understand how that could be so, because they're just familiar with copyright. Like you own the copyrights to your photos. And since this experience with New York Times was not using my photos, they were like, you have no rights. So what happened is the New York Times supposedly had a bright idea to compare two neighborhoods in Chicago that have different life expectancies to each other visually through photos. And they called it the Great Divide. And one of the neighborhoods that they used out of the two to compare was coincidentally, according to them, the same as my folded map project, the neighborhood of Englewood.
And just for people to understand, in case you didn't catch it in the beginning, that is in fact where you are from.
That's where I'm from. That's where I live. That's where I started the project with. Like, Greater Englewood is the ringer for my overall folded map project, which came out in 2018.
Just had to bring it back. Please continue.
Yes. No, thank you. So they hired a photographer who was actually not from Chicago and not Black or a person of color. He was an older white male, but he is a famous photographer, documentarian photographer named Alex Soth. And they hired him to come to Chicago to photograph these two neighborhoods that have dramatically different life expectancies. And when they published it, they put the photos side by side, very similar to my folded map project. And then they called this opinion piece, or whatever it was, the Great Divide. And so when it was published, a lot of my friends start tagging me like, "Oh my gosh, your work is in the New York Times." And I was like, "No, it isn't." So then I started to get, what the hell is this? This is totally a ripoff of Folded Map. So after me getting all the info, I was like, they didn't use my photos, but the idea, the concept, the way in which it was presented to their public is exactly Folded Map. So that's when I got pissed. That's when I tagged Alex Soth on Instagram and New York Times. And pretty much after that, Chicago, we some thugs sometimes. The whole Chicago. I'm not just talking about the areas in which people think, like all of Chicago. And they sent calls and emails and everything to the New York Times, to the point that the New York Times ended up adding a little, I'm sorry, we found out that it was a project called Folded Map, editor's note. We did not know about this before publishing this piece. Meanwhile, Alex Soth, who I tagged, decided to apologize and donate his earnings from that assignment to Folded Map. But he really didn't understand the overall issue. So that is a synopsis of kind of what happened with New York Times ultimately stealing the concept of my project. And there was a few things that was problematic about it. Obviously, the fact that they stole the concept of my project. But what I tried to help people understand is that as a journalist, like a bastion of journalism excellence, for them to admit in that editor's note, oh, this is a project in Chicago that you all should reference that we didn't know about before publishing of this piece. Okay, how? How did you not know? You are an investigative publication. Who did not do the cursory research? Or who is lying? Because for you to say that you didn't know about my project prior to this piece, then that's also a problem. And so what happened is, during all of this social media going back and forth, I started getting a lot of emails from other writers, photographers saying how New York Times, it did this to them, but not from a project that they worked on, but a story idea that they submitted, and that they didn't get called back. But it just so happened that this story idea was stolen, basically. So yeah, that's what happened with the New York Times. And I agree, more accountability needs to be had. And I have an attorney, the same attorney that trademarked my project. And there is a solid basis for litigation if I decide to pursue it. But for right now, we're just, we're sending them a letter. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's a long process to hold an institution like New York Times legally accountable. And I'm also open to having them hold themselves internally accountable.
Right.
So yes, that's still kind of ongoing, but that is what happened.
And I think it's important to note here for listeners who might be like, oh, that's just terrible. Like, yes, and this is literally a functionality of whiteness. This is why, like, as much as I make fun and joke and I'm like, oh, they trifling and this, that, the other, this is historically what the New York Times and institutions very similar to the New York Times are known for doing.
Yeah.
If you have positioned yourself as a credible journalistic institution, the foundation of journalism, vet your resources, know what you're talking about, deep dive into your content or whatever your subject matter is. And if you look up anything, because I did it just to see.
Right.
I was like, what happens if you put in Chicago city comparison, like visual city comparison, or like those kind of combinations of words? You definitely come up.
Or just segregation.
See, I didn't even think to do segregation because I was like, they're not that advanced.
Right.
Because I've seen what they've written when it comes to the matter, right? So I didn't even bother doing that. I just went even more basic. You come up. There's no fucking way. I'm sorry, there isn't. So it's one of two things. You either intentionally shirked your journalistic responsibilities, or you intentionally co-opted a phenomenal idea and were like, oh, this little black girl from Englewood, she ain't got shit. Like, she can't come for us. We're the New York Times. And quite frankly, I'm going to go with the latter because, to your point, there are a number of stories. If you look for them, if you care enough to listen to those who do not have the power that the New York Times has, there are a number of stories, to your point, like the messages you got from folks from all over who are like, I pitched them.
Yes.
And they stole my idea. Or I wrote it and they literally took it and then they had somebody else write it. Right? Or like rewrite it or co-opt it. Like this co-opting of intellectual property, of creativity, of like as a creative, like your life art, like what you produce out of your spirit and your soul.
Yes.
That is all a functionality of white supremacy. All of it.
Yes, and definite colonialism, all
1,000%. Right. Oh, I found it. It's mine.
Yeah.
Talk about the discovery doctrine.
Exactly. And then, a lot of people who were in support of, me kind of like calling New York Times out was really attacking Alex Soth, the photographer, which, as a photographer, he is accountable to a large degree because you do want to know the full context of a story that you're assigned and accepted. And he was actually commissioned, but again, similar to gentrification, he ain't my real target. I hope he does some personal reflection on jobs he accepts.
Right.
But him being an outsider, from this region, this city, I would hope that he would in the future be more empathetic and sensitive to locations that he documents. Right. But that's his thing. Okay. He was still hired.
Right.
It's the institution and the system that even gave him the opportunity. And so that is why I still hold New York Times and their editing department accountable.
Right. I mean, and I agree with you. I think I will name that because he is a white man, his learning is in how do I take accountability and responsibility for vetting the projects that I'm assigned. And the moment that I know that we are going to be talking about at any point the marginalization or the impoverishment or disenfranchisement of melanated folks.
Mm-hmm.
How do I pass this off to somebody who is of that community so that they can make sure that they are telling their own story visually?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That is actually, I hold that belief. That is his responsibility.
It definitely is.
All of our responsibilities. The appropriate also, even like take a step back, New York Times, even if they stole your idea and they're like, oh, we're going to get away with it, it's fine. You go to those that are closest to the pain, or at least from the place from which you are going to extract, right?
Yeah.
The culture and the history and the things to publish. You're telling me in all of Chicago wasn't nobody?
We didn't have our own white guy from Chicago.
Nobody?
Like, not even that.
Right. There wasn't some lovely older white man
from Chicago.
You couldn't have even picked somebody from the city. You had to fly him out from Minnesota.
Right.
I did my research.
And it also speaks to what people, need to understand. It also speaks to how, the hierarchy of metropolitan cities in covering other places. Like, you think you're getting such deep coverage, but actually you're getting a very diluted version of what really exists. But your perception is, because it's the New York Times, it has to be in depth. Like, no, it's still very light. It's still just surface level. Yeah. And so, it really just speaks to just their media dominance and how they're just at liberty to just cover other regions and markets as they wish without no accountability.
And this is my issue with them. They have no accountability. They have historically been very irresponsible in how they cover stories that impact marginalized folks.
Yes.
It's always whitewashed and white-centered. They typically always give it's almost like they do it on purpose. They're like, we're going to find the most disconnected white person on top of that.
Exactly.
You can't even pull the like, but my friend is black. Like, you don't even got one of those kind of white people. Like, the most disconnected. And then you're like, run along. Write a story about the blacks. Like,
yes.
I'm sorry, what? Or immigrants. Yo, I had somebody on and they wrote a story about the immigration camp. I hate the New York Times. Anyways.
I know, their power is pretty obscene.
And that's the thing. It is all about the power that they have, that they literally were just given because they dominate. They're white built, white centered, white serving, and they have a lot of money.
Yes.
And so they have a lot of muscle.
Yes.
And
they use it.
100%. So I'm just going to say this now, put it on the record. If you decide to take on the New York Times and you need support, you need whatever you need, listen, I am but a phone call away.
No, thank you.
And all you got to tell me is, like, what do you need? Cool.
Thank you. No,
I'll play my support role. Like, I got you. What do you need? Because especially when it comes to journalism, you're a visual storyteller, so you understand this, right? For me as a sociologist, I tell the narrative of societies and evolution of societies and behavior. It is our fundamental responsibility to be accurate and to be honest and to vet. We are responsible to other people. We are communicating information. We are telling some other people things.
Yeah.
And so to be so reckless and irresponsible and then be hella harmful?
Yes, it's just unacceptable.
Fam, what?
I know.
Like, do you know what I would do if I had
cousins like, who we need to pull up on?
Listen, I was just gonna, that's how,
you can't do it like that.
See, that's why I said, that's how I know. See, I was like, Chicago is a lot like Oakland. Like, there's some cities, when shit goes down in Oakland, all of Oakland, it don't even matter. People are like, where, when?
Who need to come on?
What am I wearing? Like, what? Is there a uniform? No? Okay. See you at 5. Like, people ride for their cities. And when you cause that much harm, I mean, what did you expect?
Exactly. So, yeah, they think it's over, but it ain't. It is not.
But yeah, no, that is my promise to you. And what I will tell you is that the folks that listen to my podcast, the folks that are committed to this work, the folks that follow me on IG, like, it ain't nothing but a word. They surprise me every single day. I'll be like, yo, this is what we're writing for today. This is who we're supporting. So you have a whole community behind you outside of Chicago, across the globe, supporting you if you need it.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you're like, I got to tell the people this about the project or yourself or Chicago that you feel like you still got to say?
No, I think that, just us connecting in this way is the type of solidarity and movement building that needs to happen. Definitely follow me on social media. That would be great. So you can share with others in your social network about information from the source on Chicago, because it's really about using our interests, our passions, and technology to expand the reach of important and critical information in this time. And what's most important with any movement are the connections people have, and so just me being connected with you all is beyond enough. But if you are interested in more specific action, then Folded Map is a nonprofit now. It's not just an art project. I formalized it into a nonprofit, and you can make a donation at foldedmapproject.com if you'd like. It helps to support my livelihood so that I can use my time to create projects like Folded Map, projects like my Belonging project that focuses on the experiences of Brown and Black youth who have been racially profiled, projects like the Folded Map Action Kit, where people can sign up to receive a beautiful folder with instructions on how to enter into your map twin neighborhood and to share your reflections. And then also my future project about land sale contracts in Chicago. So your donation would support me being able to do that and make it publicly available for people at little to no cost, especially for educators. So if that's what you like to do, that would be great as well. Otherwise, just even listening to the podcast is a blessing and appreciated.
Yeah. All of the links, they know this, but all of the links for all the things are going to be in the show notes. And now they go follow you on Instagram and they're going to tell all their friends about how great it is. It'll be, right? Otherwise, what's the point? What is the point of having digital access and digital connections and being able to, when we're not shadow banned, control narratives and tell our actual stories and put out what we want to put out if we don't actually do it? It's our social responsibility. And especially when you know that the information, I'll tell you this. This is why I'm so confident. Because they know about me that, like, I vet everything. Like,
unlike the New York Times.
Unlike the New York Times, I vet everything. And then if I miss it, I vetted it, but I missed something that was problematic or harmful, I just come back and I correct it. I clean it up. I make it known. Because I'm transparent. And we don't make it mean anything about us if we have to clean it up. That's what accountability is, right?
Exactly.
So if I'm like, no, y'all, Tonika's the truth. They're gonna be like, okay. We can go share the thing. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your energy and your experiences with us and the listeners. They'll get all the links to all the things. That's all I got. I think this is a great ending place.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet and talk to you. And when the world open up, I'm coming through.
Listen, girl, when outside opens,
yes,
go on, leave the kids and come on.
Yes. Happily.
All right, y'all. Until next time. All right, y'all. That's all I got. But don't forget your action items. 1, join me on Podia, where you can get access to tons of BTS content, including a very special Weeze interview with all of our guests. 2, rate, review, especially a written review. Subscribe, like, and share this podcast with all of your peoples. 3, if you aren't already, go peep me on IG. Follow me there. And, most importantly, keep coming back. All right, until next time, toodles!